You're listening to episode 31 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Juan Santoyo joins us to speak about the paper Effortless Awareness, using real-time neurofeedback to investigate correlates of posterior cingulate cortex activity in meditators' self-report. We talk a lot on this podcast about the scientific research on mindfulness, bringing as guests the authors of some of the most cutting-edge work in the field. And though in its infancy, the discipline of contemplative science using modern technological advances, rigorous scientific methods, and new approaches from related fields has resulted in some promising avenues for exploration. The greatest promise, however, is an outcome of how our new understanding can help those in need. Juan Santoyo is studying neuroscience in contemplative cognition at Brown University, specializing in grounded theory methodology. And our guest today is Juan Santoyo. Juan, thanks for being here.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk today about your research and some of the clinical implications of what you're doing. But first, let's talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So I was originally born in Bogota, Colombia. I spent a few of my early years there. I moved here to the States when I was 7. So pretty young, but I did most of my growing up mainly in Boston, Mass, between Cambridge and Somerville. And right now, I'm a rising senior at Brown University studying neuroscience and contemplative science. I began my studies here with a general interest in the brain sciences and bounced a little bit around the different brain science departments here. And it was really when I found myself in this dual degree program where I'm doing both the brain science and the contemplative science that it kind of started all making sense. When I first started the contemplative science concentration, which is now just recently became an official concentration here, I had to do it as an independent program. And I had to compose it myself and kind of argue for the rigor and depth of the program I was putting together and why it was valuable. And what it does is it integrates the standard third-person study of contemplative traditions and contemplative practice and introduces also the first-person study of these practices, which in my case involved a lot of direct training in meditation, and particularly in a lot of Zen and Taoist traditions. And then this was balanced with kind of the more traditional textual study of their religious and philosophical background. And so later on, as I kind of dug into this program, my program ended up focusing on how the concentrative and introspective techniques from contemplative traditions could be used to study the mind and to complement the standard techniques of the current brain sciences, which are very shy of first-person data, of data that discusses experience directly. And since this is the primary object of focus in contemplative traditions, and they have an age-old method for observing experience and learning about the mind through experience, I found a very natural fusion between these two, which in many ways shows up in this paper, which we're going to be discussing. And in the same way, taking on this study in contemplative science really helped motivate and inspire a lot of my interests in my kind of traditional neuroscience program. Having this personal practice very much compounded my interest in studying the brain from the more traditional approach.
Yeah, it's interesting how these two segments of your study are complementary, particularly today as we look at more and more scientific studies around contemplative practices. What was it that first got you interested in meditation and contemplative practices at all?
I feel like I was always interested in meditation since before I was in college, and I had always tried to practice on my own. It really seemed like a great technique towards really capitalizing on the full potential of the human mind. But it was really when I got to Brown that I had great teachers and mentors around me that it helped potentiate my practice and allowed me to really feel and see for myself the full benefits of having a practice. And very naturally, since I was already studying the brain sciences, I was very attracted to work in the research groups here that use these standard techniques of the brain sciences to study contemplative practice.
Yeah, and at Brown University, you're at a great place for exactly what you're studying.
Yeah, I've always felt incredibly blessed to have landed here at this point in time. The teachers here have been incredible mentors, and the research they lead is great in that it's both critical. The researchers here are very honest and very critical and very rigorous in their science, but at the same time, it's open-minded in a way that's hard to find.
Thank you for sharing about that. And let's talk a little bit about what this research is. Tell us a little bit about this paper and your co-authors and what the paper was about.
Yeah, so this study came out of Justin Brewer's lab while he was still working at Yale, and it was also co-authored by Katie Garrison, who is first author on the paper. She was a postdoc with Judd, and Jake Davis, who was a great driving force in this project, and Kathy Kerr, who's been my mentor for a while. And really, this paper here that we're going to focus on is actually the second part of a two-part study. And these studies sought to investigate whether this novel imaging technique of real-time fMRI neurofeedback could be used to link meditators' subjective experience with corresponding neuroimaging data. And this technique kind of capitalizes on the great spatial precision of fMRI. And with the computational power available now, you can optimize the processing speed of the fMRI data so that you can actually process changes in a signal in near real time. You get about a 3 to 5 second delay in the processing, but then you can use this process signal and provide a visual display of it to participants sitting in the scanner. So the people in the scanner are able to view this visual feedback of it's kind of a little bar that's constantly updating, showing them whether there's been a change from baseline. And they're also able to very naturally observe their experience. And so the first study that Judd led wanted to just confirm that meditators were actually seeing a link between their experience and this feedback. And he found that indeed meditators and controls as well reported correspondence between their experience and this feedback. And then that meditators were able to use a few runs of having done this to volitionally manipulate the feedback. So he would ask them, all right, now that you've seen this, make it go down, deactivate this brain region or activate it. And how he helped confirm that meditators were better able to do this, potentially because of the involvement of the brain region they were looking at in meditation, but potentially also because meditators having that practice in observing experience are better able to hone into the mental strategies that can be used to manipulate a feedback like this one. In the second study, having confirmed that there was this link and that meditators could kind of uncover a strategy to manipulate this link, the second study that I worked on wanted to look deeper into the qualitative structure of experience that seemed to correspond with the feedback that they were viewing. And so feedback here was coming from the posterior cingulate cortex. We usually call it just the PCC for short. And this brain region is one of the main hubs of the brain's default mode network, which has received a lot of attention in meditation research and generally is thought to be involved in just our default mentation, or the parts of our brain we're using when we're not doing anything in particular, which for most individuals, it'll be mind wandering. And dysfunction in this network can be associated with a variety of diseases, including Alzheimer's and addiction, which is one of the big focuses of Judd Brewer's work. And previous research on the effects of contemplative practice on brain function has identified that this brain region and this network is particularly quieter in meditators and in non-meditators, seeing a shift towards reduced mind wandering and a general tendency towards observing experience rather than trying to control it. And here we wanted to extend this research by identifying exactly what elements of the moment-to-moment experience of meditation in the scanner was linked to changes of activity in this network. That's kind of the underlying theory of what we were doing. And building on the paradigm that Judd used in the first part of the study, here we had meditators undergo a series of runs where they could gradually discover and learn how their experience was linked to this feedback they were viewing without us having told them what strategies to use or where they were getting feedback from. So they were blind to what they were supposed to be looking for. And then between these short runs, they would stop and report on what they were seeing, what in their experience was corresponding with moments of activation or moments of deactivation.
Yeah, it's interesting to note in the instructions, and for folks listening, I'll have a link to the entire paper on the episode page for the episode, so you can take a look yourself. But it does describe the different tasks that the experienced meditators did in these runs. And as Juan is saying, there's a progress, that there's first a blinded, just sit there, do nothing. And then there's okay, now do some meditation, and then describe that to us. What was that like? So that you get in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, and be as detailed as you can. Get a description of that before being shown what the chart shows, and seeing if there's correlation between that, and then moving on to real time. So there's a building of just the experience of being in the machine itself with the meditators, because that itself is a little different.
Yeah, and one of the questions we're beginning with is whether people would be able to do this at all, meditate and follow this feedback at the same time, which is why this gradual approach was really great in helping people get used to being in that very unusual environment of being in the MRI scanner.
So what did you find? Actually, before we even get into the findings with this, I'm wondering if you could describe one part of your work is grounded theory methodology. Can you describe that a little bit more and what that really means, GTM?
Yeah. So grounded theory methodology is a qualitative method that's been around for probably about 50 years now, and was generally only used in purely qualitative research and nursing, things where you would be looking at journals and trying to figure out what patients were going through. And here it was really novel that we applied it to the research of neuroimaging data. But what grounded theory tries to do is to develop an overlying theory or hypothesis that explains underlying relationships in a qualitative data set. So here we had, between all of these runs, the meditators were stopping and describing to us their experience during that run, and then relating moments in the graph that they were shown to their experience. So for example, they would say, oh yeah, this moment here where it shot up red, I was thinking of this. And it was great because over the gradual setup that you described, it really showed up in their experience where, maybe for the first 3 runs, they couldn't figure anything out. But then some of them would kind of have one of those aha moments where they would be like, oh yeah, now I see, what's doing it. And they would be able to just describe this.
Yeah, it's very interesting seeing the results when one is a participant in this. And one reason it's so important to get the participants' impressions and as accurate descriptions as you can before showing the results so that you can see, if they said, in the middle, I'd really lost concentration, but then I realized it and I got it back, and then I got a really deep, good sense experience, and I was in there till the end of it, you can see that in the chart.
Yeah, exactly. And it also really helped that the reports they provide, it helps that they are expert meditators in this part of the study, because presumably they had those thousands of hours of experience of observing experience, and they're introspective experts. And we can assume that they are somewhat better at observing and reporting on their experience than untrained individuals would be. It's a great and very easy way to have a first-person method for producing the reports. When you're dealing with introspective data, you really want to constrain for biases at the first-person position, the person who's providing the report, and the second person position, which is the analyst. And that brings us back to grounded theory. Grounded theory really involves a team effort where one person is leading the analysis, but they're constantly checking in on what they're introducing to the analysis. We had to write up a memo just about every week as we were doing this, just kind of reporting on what our analytic process of looking at the data was like. And, all biases were disclaimed in the paper. So in many ways, grounded theory is a great approach for controlling the potential bias of the analysts themselves. And then controlling for third-person bias is more of a standard thing in neuroimaging research. Coming back to grounded theory, should I just describe the process a bit further?
Yeah, please do.
So yeah, between runs, we would have the meditators' reports. They would describe their experience and how their experience related to changes in the feedback. So then we had this great, very rich qualitative data set. And so in order to analyze it, we use grounded theory. And grounded theory involves a very repetitive, iterative process where you begin just moving very quickly through the data set, coding everything that seems relevant, and then gradually coming back and recoding everything. And through this process of recoding, you're comparing the codes you've been creating to one another and comparing them to the data as you read through it again, so that you can combine kind of your original codes into higher order constructs that describe these codes, and maybe get rid of some that no longer seem necessary or seem to already be described by some of these other constructs. And so you're kind of gradually building up a hierarchy where you have these original codes that are then better represented by higher order constructs. And then you represent those with a third level of constructs that describe these experiential processes. Did that describe the process well?
Yeah, it does. And in the study itself, and folks will see this, you have the data using the GTM displayed in Figure 1. And it's interesting because it shows that same hierarchical structure that you described, and seeing the ties between, the open codes of open awareness and calm and tranquility and relaxing to the central codes of pleasure, equanimity, deliberating, remembering, to theoretical codes, contentment, concentration. It's interesting to see the relationship between those and how they tie together.
Definitely. That figure is great in showing that. And grounded theory really encourages the researcher to be very transparent in what they're doing and how they came to their final hypotheses or theoretical constructs. And so including that figure is a great way of showing where those final constructs that people might end up talking about more, what they're really embedded in, where those moments of pleasure and equanimity were there as well. And maybe, some of those were few, and because of that, they were later on kind of combined into one of these higher order constructs. But that figure showing that they were original codes helps to still demonstrate what was contained in the original data. And then following up on that, in the results section itself, we include excerpts that help exemplify some of these codes and constructs.
So tell us a little bit about the results. What came out of this study? What was interesting and what showed up?
Yeah, so we ended up with 4 experiential constructs two that corresponded with activation of the PCC and two that corresponded with deactivation. And two of these were interesting in that they kind of confirmed our expectations and that they match what's in the literature. And this was that of the concentration and the distracted awareness, which really lined up with existing literature showing that the default mode network is very much involved in mind wandering. And so this activation had to involve this kind of experience of a distracted, hazy awareness, while deactivation had to do with the default mode network going offline and potentially this task on network coming online where you're concentrated and focused on what you're doing. So that really lined up very well with the existing literature. And then the other constructs were actually something that just emerged from the data itself, something we weren't really expecting. And so they're cool in that they're very novel hypotheses. And that's of the effortlessness, effortless action, effortless doing was corresponded with deactivation. And this was a construct that had to do with experiences of being very relaxed, not really trying to control the feedback or not really trying hard to meditate, but just observing experience and letting it happen. And many participants found that when they kind of just stopped trying to control it, those were some of the strongest moments of deactivation.
Yeah, it shows in the graph and the quote from one of the participants, and it shows a lot of blue, which is the deactivation of the PCC. I noticed that the more I relaxed and stopped trying to do anything, the bluer it went.
Yeah. And on the other hand, it seemed like when people were really trying hard to make it go blue or trying really hard to do something very specific with their meditation, at those moments it would go red. And it was a very interesting distinction between not trying and trying. And Judd's gone on to talk a good bit about this, which he very much relates to being in a flow state. And it's that point where you're kind of just, you're in the zone and you don't need to push yourself to drive that state of that observing calm state. And it's when you push yourself that you trip yourself up and you come back from observing to trying to control.
So one of your passions, and I know those of some of your co-authors on this study, is what the clinical implications may be, that there are some areas that are worth exploring. What are some of those for you that you think about?
Yeah, so I actually ended up writing my thesis on this method and how it contributes to neurophenomenology as a method of studying consciousness. And at the surface, I think it's very clear that this method really pushes forward our ability to study subjective experience and study subjective experience as it relates to brain activity in real time. And so in many ways, it really pushes forward this project that's been around for 20 years, neurophenomenology, that tries to respond to the hard problem of explaining the relationship between the quality of consciousness, the quality of experience, and the underlying physical activity of experience and consciousness. And I'm coming to the clinical thing, but I wanted to start here.
That's all right. Good background as well. Appreciated.
Yeah, because it seemed like a great push forward here. I spent a lot of time working on how we could push this method forward a little bit and how it could complement existing methods for studying consciousness. And what it looks like is that people are able to very easily develop, these participants in our experiment were very easily able to develop strategies for volitionally manipulating the graph. After just 10 short runs of doing this, they all went through 3 runs where they were asked to deactivate their PCC, and then 3 runs where they were asked to activate it. And they could pretty much always do this and then provide a description of the strategy they were using. I think that's really cool because not only are they providing that verbal report of their conscious experience, but it shows that they will be able to produce a a description of how to elicit that experience, which allows you to then on your own replicate that procedure and see for yourself what they're describing felt like. And it allows you to, in a way, externally validate somebody else's experience. And this is very much embedded in contemplative practice. You give people a procedure to elicit an experience that is meant to provide insight. And so I thought that was really cool in terms of consciousness research. I think there's other limitations that are still going to keep this from being a complete victory. But what's really cool about that is that we can also use these procedures to help people outside of the scanner drive these specific neural signals in specific directions. So, for example, we might know a specific pattern of connectivity between different brain regions is associated with a specific disease. Using a feedback paradigm like this one, we may be able to have these expert introspectors, expert meditators discover a strategy or experiential processes that help drive this pattern of connectivity or brain activity in the opposite direction. And this then is very easily turned into a mental training strategy that helps rehabilitate a specific network in a very targeted way. So meditation is it's a human invention. And we're now adapting in forms of MBSR and MPCT, we're adapting some very age-old techniques and paradigms. But where I see that this kind of bridges with existing neuroscience is that we can use the knowledge of the brain sciences that are shedding more and more light on the biological foundations of psychiatric disease and really shape and calibrate our meditation techniques so as to target these psychiatric signals and signatures.
Well, I hope your work continues along well at Brown. And our guest has been Juan Santoyo. Juan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.